ॐ सहना भवतु सहनो भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति.
Thank you, Chandan. Let me begin with a warm welcome to all of you to today's talk, which is on administrative reforms and their story from 1990 to 2021. And I would like to thank Mr. V. Srinivas, who is Additional Secretary in the Department of Administrative Reforms and Public Grievances. And he will tell us about this fascinating journey of administrative reforms in the last 40 years or so. Mr. Srinivas is a senior IAS officer, and he has also, apart from dealing with the administrative reforms and public grievances, he is also has an additional charge of Director General of National Center for Good Governance. He has a master's degree in chemical engineering from the College of Technology, Osmania University. And now he is in the 33rd year of his distinguished service in the Indian Administrative Service. He has held senior positions in the Government of India and Government of Rajasthan, having served as chairman of the Board of Revenues for Rajasthan, Ajmer, and Joint Secretary and Deputy Secretary in the Government of India. He is a recipient of the Digital India Award 2020 for implementation of e-office. He has published 2 books and a number of papers and articles, and is a frequent speaker on public administration and public finance. We at the VIF have been fortunate to have interacted with him in the past. We released one of his books, I think it was in 2020, just before the COVID lockdown. Mr. Srinivas has also written on economic issues. He's written on IMF, he's written on G20, and he wrote an excellent paper on Pakistan economy for the VIF. He is a senior administrator, a respected academician, and an institution builder par excellence. So thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for joining us today, and we look forward to a very engaging conversation with you on a topic which is very relevant, very timely, and about which I think many people have views, very strong views. You would agree that an efficient, responsive, and professional administration is a must for India, and we require a new governance model for the 21st century. We have been fortunate that Sardar Patel laid the foundation of a robust administrative system after independence, and it has stood us well in our journey as an independent nation. No reform is worth its salt unless it is implemented properly. I think administration and bureaucracy, be it at the center or at the states, has a major role to play in timely implementation. Even the most well-meaning reforms, they come to a naught if they are not properly implemented. Despite its many faults, India can be justly proud of its administrative system. Indian administrators are respected the world over for their skills and caliber. They have contributed to the development of many nations. And as we speak in India, all India services play a significant role in holding the country together. So I think they play a major role in the national integration as well. Yet there is a widespread impatience about the functioning of the bureaucracy. It is widely felt that the footprint and stranglehold of bureaucracy needs to be lightened in the 21st century India. Corruption, delays, insensitivity, lack of required skills, politicization, to name a few, have been the faults of the Indian administration, and this is the public perception. So the bureaucracy has a certain negative perception. It may come as a surprise that the union government constituted more than 50 commissions and committees to look into the administrative and civil reforms since independence. This figure I learned from Mr. Srinivas himself when we were corresponding on the email. Now, that's a huge number. Clearly, either we are very responsive, that we continue to change our or recommend change in our system, or there is something amiss in our system. What needs to be changed, I think, is the bureaucratic mindset, which is conditioned to ask questions, raise hurdles, rather than deliver outcomes. So an outcome-oriented administration and bureaucracy is what we require today. We may also ask a question whether we are changing fast enough. I mean, there have been many administrative reforms, and I think bureaucracy has also changed quite visibly. There have been in the last few decades efforts to introduce technology, innovation, efficient management into the governance model. And certainly there are positive results for everyone to see. And these have stood us in good stead during this time of COVID. But I think the country is in a hurry. Our governance model needs to be transformed quickly. The window of opportunity is closing in. China, which was behind us in the 1950s on all parameters, is now way ahead. The carbon space needed for development is now limited, and we have to complete all our projects quickly. Pressure is coming on to us to adopt zero emissions governance, and this would restrict room for maneuver, and this will place a lot of pressure or on our administration to be more efficient. I think nobody could be better than Mr. Srinivas to talk about administrative reforms and how these have impacted the bureaucracy and how it has impacted the public. So I request him to speak for about 45 to 50 minutes so that there is enough time for questions from the audience and where some additional points, if he likes, he can make. So once again, thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for joining us today, and we look forward to your talk. Mr. Srinivas.
Respected Director, Vivekananda International Foundation, Dr. Arvind Gupta ji, distinguished participants, my senior colleague, Shri Vimarsh ji, I find a lot of other colleagues who have served with me over the past 30 years. I find Mr. Nag, Dr. Vaidehi Agnihotri, Professor Manju Vatsa, a whole lot of them whom I've served from my early years in service till now in the audience. It's a great privilege to speak at the Vivekananda International Foundation. This is the third time I'm coming to the foundation, and I've been following very closely the virtual Vimarsh series of discussions that the foundation has been conducting. And I did take the opportunity to propose to the director a discussion on administrative reforms. And he was kind enough to immediately accept my request and take it forward within a very short duration. I'm also grateful to Dr. Anutama Ganguly for facilitating this interaction and providing all the logistical support in the run-up to this discussion. I have a PowerPoint presentation for the audience, and I'll request VIF to kindly share the PowerPoint presentation. Subject that I have chosen for the discussion, next slide please, is administrative reforms, challenges and opportunities. As an official who has seen governance for 3 decades plus now, I've been witness to a series of reforms that have happened over a period of time. And I'd like to share with you this vast journey of how administration has grown and how governance paradigm has changed over the last 3 decades. Next slide, please. This is a quote from the Mahabharata, and it has been cited in the Second Administrative Reforms Commission. And it says, in governance is realized all the forms of renunciation. In governance is combined all knowledge. In governance is centered all the worlds. So this I found was an apt way to start a lecture at the Vivekananda International Foundation, an institution that is propagating the best values of governance across various sectors and spheres. Next, please. The structure of my presentation is on the following lines. I'll give an overview of the administrative reforms for the period 1950 to 1990, when we were more of a regulatory administrative model. And then came the massive reform in the 1990s, where liberalization brought in a paradigm shift in India's governance models, when we had to move away from a regulatory administrative structure to unshackling the cobwebs in the economy and giving greater space to private sector. Then came the third phase between 2000 to 2014, wherein which a lot of regulatory governance models and rights-based services were promoted. Then the administrative reforms for the last 7 years, which witnessed massive scaling up of in implementation of programs. That was what was witnessed under the maximum governance, minimum government. And I'd also like to deal with another important aspect, that is leadership and the whole of government approach, how digital governance models have changed India's governance approach to the Digital India, and increasing efficiency in decision making, which is a major aspect of governance that the Department of Administrative Reforms is currently working on. And before the conclusion. Next slide, please. So let me take you to the first chapter, which is Administrative Reforms 1950 to 1990 period. Next, please. The basic areas of administrative reform mandate that public administration of the country should be accountable, citizen-friendly, and it should provide timely grievance redressal. It must also ensure transparency and endow citizens with the right to information. And it must promote integrity in public service. Everybody wants a corruption-free government and a motivated civil service that is driven. They must have the passion to ensure delivery of good governance, and also the intent to ensure the delivery of good governance. And public administration must be result-oriented, and it should improve service delivery. Next, please. As the director has pointed out, it would be important to understand the journey from Gorwala to e-governance. Gorwala was one of the seminal ICS officers who wrote the first report on public administration in 1951. And since then, we've had more than 50 commissions and committees. So there were commissions which looked at examination pattern to the civil services. There were commissions which looked at the overall structure of reform. There were commissions which looked at ethics. There were commissions which looked at the institution of district collector. But I've chosen 4 important committees which I'll present in this forum. One is the 1951 Gorwala Committee report on public administration. It's a thin report running into about 30-35 pages. Then we had the Dean of the Syracuse University of the Maxwell College of Public Administration, Paul Appleby, who was invited to undertake a survey of public administration in India. And he presented a very brief report of 50 pages in 1953. Then K. Santanam presented a committee report on prevention of corruption, which resulted in establishment of the Central Vigilance Commission. Then, of course, the Second Administrative Reforms Commission, which worked in the years 2005 to 8, presented a 15-volume report running into over 10,000 pages. Next, please. Gorwala was quite a thinker and one of the legendary civil servants India produced. And if you read Gorwala's report, even now, there are several points that you find are quite relevant. And one of the points that I picked up for this presentation was, there is no truer maxim from the point of view of good administration than the old rule. What is not inspected is simply not done. And this I found was quite real in many charges, particularly supervisory charges as head of department. So it has to be inspected, constantly pursued. Otherwise, things are simply not done. There is an inbuilt inertia into the system. So inspections of police stations have to be done by district collector, inspections of tehsils have to be done, inspections of collectorates by the chairman board of revenue. So the mandate of inspections is a very important part of administration to take governance forward. The second thing that Gorwala recommended, which continues to be relevant, is if a secretary spends half a day once a week in going through the branches of his own ministry, there can be very little doubt that delays would be reduced. So it was on this basis that senior officers' meetings were introduced in Government of India. They happen on a weekly basis. I do recall as a young deputy secretary in 2000, the Secretary of Petroleum calling a meeting at every Monday morning to generally review the next and set the agenda for the week. And that practice continues to this day, whether it is on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis or once in a fortnight, it has been continued. And Gorwala further says that the reasons for delay in decision making is that junior officers, generally the deputy secretaries, get to decide far fewer files than in the past due to continuous interference of higher officers. And although it falls within their domain, it still has to be submitted to higher levels. So the file movement he found was files were moving up needlessly. Next, please. Gorwala's report further highlights integrity as one of the cardinal and philosophical premises of good administration. Next, please. Slide, please. I do recall my discussion with Dr. Dugur Subbarao, a former governor of the Reserve Bank of India. I was invited to present the Civil Service Day oration at the Harishchandra Mathur Rajasthan Institute of Public Administration in 2018. So one of the questions that I asked Dr. Subbarao was, how does he perceive the Indian administrative service in the 21st century, the challenges that the IAS officers face in the 21st century, and when you compare it with those that you face in the 20th century? He said, Srinivas, there's really no difference between the challenges that we face in the 20th century to those that you face in the 21st century. And that is the commitment to the larger public good against all odds. Every day you see officers facing pressure groups, you see officers fighting to implement the rule of law, standing out to ensure that good governance is given to the length and breadth of the country. And he further mentioned that the IAS competency remains anchored in the foundational and non-negotiable values of integrity and credibility. You can outsource skills, but these foundational values, these simply cannot be outsourced. And I'll deal with this in the later part of the presentation. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yes, decision-making in government, particularly in the Secretariat, is a very important aspect. And this is a quote from Gorwala's report, in which delegation was given to an undersecretary, but still the secretary wanted to see and understand how the undersecretary was taking decisions. So he did send out a slip saying that, send me all the files that pertain to this particular budget head. And he called 38 files from the undersecretary and then sent it back with just a simple note that's seen. The undersecretary was quite curious to understand how the secretary would have decided these papers. And the secretary merely said, it's a matter of your discretion, not for knowledge. It is left to you and it's a matter for your discretion. He just said, don't bother about it. I would leave it to you to decide these files. Next, please. Next slide, please. Appleby's report is very interesting. And Appleby studied the organization and method chart in Bengal. And he found that in the Bengal Secretariat, a fresh receipt that is received in the central registration unit would be handled, almost 30 to 42 handlings happened. That is, it went through layers and layers of bureaucracy. And it was given, when it was given for consideration in a single department, by the time it was disposed, it went through so many heads. And delayering was one of the big aspects that he identified. The second aspect he found was that senior officers were found themselves with serious overloading of work because they had to schedule their appointments, maintain their diary, make telephone calls. So we recommended a strong cadre of stenographers to assist the senior officials. And that was how the Central Secretariat Stenographer Service was created based on the recommendations of Paul Appleby. Next, please. Paul Appleby further made two important recommendations. One, he said, was please establish an organization and management unit in every ministry. And this O&M unit was to examine the rules of procedure, the delayering aspect, reorganization, restructuring, whether the implementation of desk officer systems, and also office modernization. And he said that public administration has become a science which needs greater study, and government must establish a National Institute of Public Administration. And that was how the Indian Institute of Public Administration was established to enable interchange of learnings, reflections, and fruits of special studies, which are of great usefulness. In fact, the IAPA has come with two seminal publications. One is how the government of India functioned from the years 1834, when it was shifted from Calcutta to Delhi, till 1947 in terms of number of departments, how they were created, integration of departments, how it took place, how the secretariat system, particularly the system of noting that Lord Curzon established in India, and why they felt recording every decision was such an important feature of governance. So the IAPA has contributed in its own ways to propagation of the field of public administration. Next, please. The Santhanam Committee report resulted in the creation of the Central Vigilance Commission, and today the Central Vigilance Commission represents one of our foremost regulatory oversight institutions in terms of handling issues that result in tolerable exercise of authority and also in corrupt practices. And they represent a very for oversight with central vigilance officers in every department, in every public sector undertaking to monitor adherence to rule-based decision making. So Santhanam said that administrative delays, government taking upon themselves more than what they could manage, personal discretion in the exercise of powers, these need to be curbed, and these can be curbed only when there is an oversight by a statutory commission with which is deploying vigilance officers across the length and breadth of the administrative spectrum. Next, please. Then you had the first Administrative Reforms Commission. Next slide, please. So the first Administrative Reforms Commission, next slide, please. The first ARC was patterned after the Hoover Commission. In fact, the Hoover Commission of the United States functioned in two sets, one in 1949 and again in 1953. And they looked at how do we shift from a spoils-based system to a meritocratic examination-based system in the post-World War II period. And the first ARC gave two important ideas. In fact, the reports are very thin. If you see, they gave 28 reports, and each of them is less than 50 pages. And they looked at the changing nature of administration from law and order agency to one of developmental administration. And they also recommended a drastic overhaul of the machinery of government for attaining a socialist pattern of society. The next slide, please. The first ARC also looked at issues of appointment of the Lokpal and the Lokayukta, and introduction of performance budgeting. Next slide, please. So the establishment of the Department of Personal and Administrative Reforms under the Cabinet Secretariat, it looked at greater independence of Zilla Parishads by having a district development officer. Today we have a CEO of Zilla Parishad who's mostly from the Indian Administrative Service across all the 738 odd districts of India. And it said that positive organizational culture and a motivational climate, also the establishment of administrative tribunals was an area that they recommended very strongly for faster decision making and improving justice delivery systems. Next, please. Next slide, please. Then we had a number of committees which looked at civil services examination reforms. And I gave the civil service examination under the Kothari Commission's committee recommendations of 1976, which mandated that there would be 2 specialized papers and 2 general studies papers, as also 2 language papers. And the upper age of recruitment was 26. Then came the Satish Chandra committee report, and Satish Chandra said that there's a need to introduce an essay paper, and further, marks for personality test are to be increased. Then the Yogendra Allat Committee report, as also the Satish Chandra Committee report, recommended increase in the upper age limit for recruitment. Today, the upper age limit for recruitment was initially revised from 26 to 28, and then from 28 to 30. And the Yogendra Allat Committee said objective papers and preliminary examination, and also they said one specialized paper along with 2 general studies papers and 2 language papers. But it does have an essay paper continues, and then the personality test has higher gradation than what the earlier ones had. Next, please. They also looked at the number of attempts in which a candidate could appear for the civil service examination. The number of attempts were increased from 3 to 4. Next slide, please. The administrative reforms in 1990s. 1991 actually represented a quantum change in our governance models. Next slide, please. And here was a major economic reform that was being undertaken, and India had to undergo a significant structural adjustment program, and the objective was to unshackle the Indian economy from the cobwebs of unnecessary bureaucratic control. So the presence of the state in the commanding heights of the economy was withdrawn. So we found new institutions like the Board for Industrial and Financial Restructuring coming in, a national mineral policy, a telecom policy, a highways act, a disinvestment commission being set up. And another big game changer was the establishment of the Panchayati Raj institutions. And this really changed the perspective in which the district collector interacted with local government authorities. Next, please. Next slide, please. So we have these annual conferences of chief secretaries, and the 1997 conference is an important one. This conference recommended accountable, citizen-friendly government and transparency and right to information, improving performance and integrity of public services. But most importantly, it said, please develop a grievance redressal machinery, and that actually formed the basis of setting up a central public grievance redressal management system as a CP Grams portal on which nearly 33 lakh Indians filed their grievances addressed to the Prime Minister today. So it also said that the legal rights of citizens should be informed to all of them, and we must formulate citizen charters by all ministries. The states took it a step further and formulated the Right to Services Acts promulgated across many states of India. Next, please. Next slide, please. Let me come to the administrative reforms of the 2000 to 2014 period. Next, please. And the first big change that was brought about was the right to information. And we have the former CIC in this web room, Mr. Vimal Julkaji, and the broad finding was public authorities should be notified, and all departments and ministries operationalizing efficient information management systems. Then came the Right to Public Services Acts in states, which ensured that statutory laws that guarantee time-bound service delivery of public services. So we have today Right to Service Commissions in about 6 states. The Maharashtra Right to Service Commission is one of the most functional ones. And the chambers and Mr. Swadhin Kshatriya has been ensuring rigorous monitoring to ensure over 500 services are delivered in a time-bound manner. Then we have public grievances, which have, with the integration of portals and modernized digital platforms, have witnessed a quantum change in which India handles its grievance redressal system. Then developing institutional structures happened. Then we had empowering citizens. So there was the JAM Trinity that came into play. Then also the common service centers were created. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yes. New regulatory agencies had to be set up in a liberalized economy. And the first big regulatory agency that was set up was the Securities and Exchange Board of India. And the SEBI was strengthened from a single-member commission to a multi-member commission in 2002. I do recall I was private secretary to the finance minister when the SEBI bill was enacted in Parliament in December 2002. Similarly, the Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority changed the manner in which central service officers or all India service officers draw their pensions, because Now there is a contributory pensions model that has been introduced. The IRDA has been further strengthened by making it a multi-member body. We do have the establishment of a Financial Stability and Development Council, a Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. The Competition Commission of India was initially started as a smaller body. Today it is a flourishing institution. Next slide, please. And we have the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board, which was still under discussion in early 2000s, but then they went on to become a reality. The National Highways Authority, which enabled implementation, the Golden Quadrilateral, and also massive highways being taken up across India. The Airport Authority, which was witnessing massive privatization of airports and significant improvements in infrastructure, and the Director General of Civil Aviation. So these were the new regulatory bodies that came in, and regulatory governance became an important part of India's structures of governance in a manner in which no other government was dealing with. At the same time, the pay commissions repeatedly said, please downsize government because there is more and more corporatization of activities. So contractual appointments in selected areas of operations were recommended, and the pay commissions continue to recommend that new regulators which have evolved need to be enforced. And the 6th APC also said, please diminish layers, reduce layers in government structures, restore motivation in public service, ensure delegation with accountability, and ensure best possible talent should be brought in. Next slide. The game changer was the National E-Governance Plan was started by government. And the objective of it was to reduce the number of trips to government offices from 8 trips. They studied and came up and said that it should be brought down to 1 to 2 trips. The waiting time in government offices was to be reduced by about 40%. And when I was a probationer, I was quite fascinated that the Digital Land Records Modernization Project was commenced. And today, when I see the digital land project of individual states, I was looking at the Uttar Pradesh Digital Land Project, and it has more than 1 crore hits on its portal every day. There are states like Telangana which have linked registration of land or land sales with automatic mutations, time-bound mutations. So it has brought in significant benefits to citizens, especially at a time when partition of holdings is so widely prevalent across the rural countryside. And there has been significant direct cost savings to citizens. And government offices, the National E-Governance Plan envisaged will set up a single window for grievance redressal. Also, there would be services like air travel reservation, train tickets, which would be made online. Next, please. One of the big changes that were introduced in this 2004 to 2014 period was social audit. And social audit initially envisaged that civil works that were undertaken at village level would be put up on a board, how much it costed, who was the executive agency, what was the quality. It was with the objective of increasing accountability and transparency, and also to improve local decision making. It was also meant to be a public vigilance verification process. And the other initiative was from April 21st to be celebrated as National Civil Services Day to mark the occasion when Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel addressed the first batch of IAS probationers at Metcalfe House. And a state of governance report was published. I'll share with you how the Good Governance Index has evolved in 2019 in terms of assessment of the quality of governance of states and also on social accountability mechanisms. Next, please. Then came the second ARC. The second ARC was a 4-year exercise, and it submitted 15 reports. And each report runs into several hundred pages. It covered right to information, better utilization of human potential, the good governance practices, crisis management, ethics, public order, local governance, conflict resolution, social capital, refurbishing personal administration. It looked at the organizational structure of Government of India, citizen-centric administration, promoting e-governance, district administration, and it gave over 1,500 recommendations. And the recommendations varied from over 1,000 recommendations have been implemented. Next, please. Next slide, please. So the second ARC's salient recommendations called for, next slide, called for accountability of flows from, next slide, please. Yes, the second ARC called for accountability in decision-making flows, credibility, predictability, and transparency. It said technology, efficient discharge of government business. And they also said that there are too many levels and there needs to be rationalization and reorganization by recasting the allocation of business rules. And there were bodies like the Performance Management Division that was set up in the Cabinet Secretariat to formulate results framework documents. So performance monitoring and evaluation systems were introduced across ministries. And ad hoc task forces were created to finalize the RFPs on an annual basis. Next slide, please. Coming to the contemporary day, next slide, please. The maxim that the government follows is maximum governance, minimum government, and that is what has featured in the period 2014 to 21. The government came to the view that the Weberian model of governance, which was rigid, rule-bound, hierarchic characteristics, required massive revamping, and there was a quest for a new public service based on citizen-centric parameters. Further, it was also witnessed a change from low capacity to a high capacity state. For example, I recall how difficult it was to saturate one district, Dungarpur in Rajasthan, with financial inclusion. Today, we have the whole of India with Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. The government went in for intensive reviews for premature retirement, and you would have read a number of cases where premature retirements under 56G were offered to officers with doubtful integrities, with proven incompetency or insubordination. Next, please. Amongst the administrative reforms introduced was multi-source feedback for placement of senior appointments. And this was a very important way. And zero tolerance for corruption by operationalizing the Lokpal, further strengthening of the Prevention of Corruption Act, discontinuation of interviews for Group B and Group C posts, because this became a game changer. It was something that was done without interviews. And self-certification for appointments, use of IGOT for training platforms, and a national recruitment agency has been announced, which will integrate the examination patterns for all the subordinate services. Next, please. The civil services in 2021, how does it look? Recruitment is highly competitive. Almost 10 lakh candidates apply for about 1,800 jobs. It's one of the most competitive examinations in the world. And anybody who gets in with through sheer commitment and hard work. There's simply no shortcut to entry into the civil service. Training norms have become very stringent. Constant evaluations have been introduced to meet current challenges, and efficient management of public resources necessitates open, transparent, and accountable systems of delivery. So there is the accountability to institutions of governance like the CBC, the CBI, the C&AG, the CIC has increased a great deal. In fact, accountability levels today are far higher than they were ever in the past. Further, the institutional framework to fight corruption has been strengthened. As I said, there have been amendments to the Prevention of Corruption Act that have been introduced and come to the measures that the Central Vigilance Commission has introduced. The C&AG's forms of audit have become far more intensive and also far more nuanced. And the Lokpal and Lokayukt Act has been operationalized fully. Next slide, please. So Vigilance Awareness Weeks have become a reality. In fact, the Prime Minister addressed the Central Vigilance officers and the Administrative Service officers at the commencement of the Vigilance Awareness Week. The theme this year was Eradicate Corruption, Build a New India. And also, there's been a lot of focus on ethics and accountability. So Mr. Sanjay Kothari, as the CVC, introduced visits to rural India in foundation trainings for all services that are recruited into the public sectors or into banks. And a people's movement to fight corruption has been tried to be created. An e-pledge has been created. Anybody can go and take an e-pledge. An integrity index for organizations is under formulation. A number of meetings on the subject have been held. Next, please. At the same time, there has been a strengthening of auditing and accounting practices. For example, we had two budgets. The railways and general budgets have been merged. There's also been a merger of plan and non-plan expenditures, and further opening up of foreign direct investment and introduction of GSTs. C and AG had to undergo major reforms in its financial governance models, and particularly a lot of money went from the government of India to the state health societies. So in terms of audit of local government institutions has been further strengthened. At the same time, RTI has become a reality, and the Central Information Commission has become a driving force to ensure that the citizens' right to know is implemented without fear or favor. And the process of accessing information has become far more transparent, timely, and trouble-free. And it has led to improvements in governance. And citizens have really become a part of the decision-making process. Next, please. How do I see the government model today? And it can be said that it is building to scale, building to last. And embracing technology became the key priority for civil servants. So e-governance programs have been introduced, and that can be seen with Aadhaar cards, universalization of Aadhaar cards, Jan Dhan accounts, universalization in terms of construction of toilets. So a massive technological boom has been witnessed, and we have seen a massive building to scale. At the same time, there have also been a lot of amendments in introducing, recognizing merit and talent. So the scheme of Prime Minister's Awards for Excellence in Public Administration has been broad-based. We used to get 80 nominations in 2014. Today, we get more than 3,500 nominations. Every district collector applies in several categories. And the manner in which government recognizes and replicates innovations has become quite significantly different. Conferences are being held across the length and breadth of the country to replicate and disseminate success stories in administration. And we have witnessed a massive scaling up of participation, flagship programs being given awards. At the same time, the National E-Governance Awards have also become further strengthened. And there's a lot of emphasis on digital India. So at the same time, we've witnessed secretariat reforms like e-office, which I will refer to in the next slide. Next, please. I did refer to the documentation, and the first manual that was written for the Central Secretariat was the Central Secretariat Manual of Office Procedure, and that dates back to 1899 when Curzon introduced a system of noting. Today, the Central Secretariat Manual of Office Procedure, which has been revised and updated, enables the march to the creation of a digital secretariat with huge delegation of powers in terms of virtual private networks, digital signatures to the deputy secretaries. An assessment of states has been introduced through the Good Governance Index. The National E-Governance Service Delivery Assessment examines the quality of e-governance services that India is delivering. Further, next please. Further, there has been a massive revamping in which we address grievances, 33 lakh grievances being addressed at national level. It's a huge change. We used to get 2 to 3 lakh grievances, and the delineation of 78,000 officers on the CP Grams portal. State portals are integrated with CP Grams. In fact, there are as many as 25 digital platforms across India to handle public grievances. And each time the subject is handled in each state by the Chief Minister's office. So there are very advanced digital platforms like Janaspandana of Karnataka, the Janahita program of Telangana, the Spandana program of Andhra Pradesh, Aple Sarkar of Maharashtra. Then you have in Jammu Kashmir, the JK iGrams, the Chief Minister's window in Haryana. Each of them were directly monitored by the Chief Ministers to ensure citizen grievances are delivered on time. In fact, Gujarat has established one of the most advanced feedback call centers where thousands of calls are made to every citizen who files a grievance and to ensure that there is adequate satisfaction about governance. Let me come to the second aspect, that is leadership in governance. And leadership in governance is an important subject of public administration, of good governance too. And leadership matters most because leaders can make transformational changes. Next, please. And Leadership also necessitates mobilizing people with different skills and backgrounds towards the common goal of advancing the cause of public administration. You need to unlearn old habits and to learn new skills. So, as I said, e-governance has become a new skill which needs to be acquired. Next, please. And while the Constitution may indicate the direction in which we are to move, the social structure will decide how far we are able to move and at what pace. I do recall in one of my visits to a village in Rajsamand district, I asked the women who were participating in the Prashashan Gaon Ki Aur campaign, how many of them had Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts and how many of them used the common service centers. Every single hand went up. The reason why society has so much change has been witnessed is because rural societies have accepted technology platforms in a significant way. Leadership also requires individual character, best represented by loving families, strong bonds, respecting parents, learning to work in teams, and a holistic approach. Also, it requires a national character, constitutional values deeply rooted in high moral tones, and also a transformational self in which the needs of the workers need to be cared for, and complete well-being and dedication to the well-being of the team. Next, please. I also find the focus on the individual is an important component of leadership. And every time, every job, this is what I discovered, for example, in my tenure at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, a patient's journey in a hospital, a litigant's journey in revenue courts, I found was inordinately long, 22 years to get a suit decided in the Board of Revenue. And a complainant's journey in grievance redressal, you had to provide him timely grievance redressal. The individual focus is very, very important, and one has to reach out to people to touch lives. If you're talking about good governance practice and a major administrative reform, the focus on the individual is very, very important. Next, please. And further, leadership is a marathon, and there is simply no shortcuts to success. Nothing comes easy in life, and in case India's democracy is to be sustained, hours and hours of hard work by the civil service is required. Next, please. And this is a quote that I liked, and I thought I'll share it with the House. Performance leads to recognition. Recognition brings respect, and respect enhances power. There's simply no shortcut to success. Next, please. And the qualities of a good leader, how should the civil service operate? And it operates with simple business rules, easy to understand, easy to practice, and easy to communicate. Do the simple things right. Come to office on time. I was fascinated by Delhi Metro. Everybody comes on time. Everybody is dressed in uniforms, and the trains work on time. Innovation is an important tool to become stronger and enhance productivity. And also, there should be an openness and curiosity. It's also important to work regular hours and relaxing daily. These are simple concepts to stay disciplined. Next, please. I wanted to speak about ethics in governance. And a sound value system differentiates the long-term players from others. And as I said, I spoke about leadership, and I'm reminded of this Niti Shastra sloka, Krishto Nasti Durviksham. Nothing comes easy in life. The same way, in the case of ethics, you need to have these high moral tones which the Constitution lays down, and an ethical leadership bringing enhanced productivity by leveraging technology. That is how I would like to define current day's governance. To foster human capital to ensure institutional transformation, and government demonstrates empathy for constituents and work to create a knowledge-based economy. Next, please. Next slide, please. So there are work ethics, and with the empathy and compassion, and ethics are important because they represent self-accountability and public accountability, which are both interrelated, and the latter imposes checks on the former. Next, please. Next slide, please. I'd also like to touch on the whole of government approach. And the whole of government approach is the movement from isolated silos in public administration to networks and digital platforms. There is a book, Breaking Silos, that I was reading, and I found how much government has changed over 30 years. And transforming the way government works for the people. In fact, the National E-Services Delivery Assessment really looks at how the whole of government approach functions. And to meet the increased demand on part of citizens for professionalized and accessible public services. Next slide, please. Across the world, governments are focusing on going digital. When I was serving at the IMF in 2003, the United States had a social security number, which was a unique digital identity for every citizen. Today, India has Aadhaar, and it provides a massive digital platform to take governance forward. So in the United States, 21st century governance is based on better digital services. You look at Singapore, again, they have a digital government footprint. You look at Australia, each of these countries, Japan, has a digital footprint which are based upon a digital identity of an individual. And so India, in establishing the Aadhaar and scaling it up to this magnitude, using it for dissemination of public services, has brought in a massive game changer of an effort. Next, please. So Digital India, and I vividly recall the launch of Digital India on 1st July 2015. In fact, one of my projects, the Digital Aims, the www.ors.gov.in, the online patient registration was launched that day. And it represents a campaign to transform India to a digitally empowered society. High-speed digital highways to unite the nation, and governance has become very transparent. Next, please. So, and Digital India really led to massive scaling up of programs. Over 100 billion e-transactions can be seen on eTAL. We have common service centers which run into millions. The number of government services offered on Umang has now reached 1150, 31 million Jan Dhan accounts, and universalization of Aadhaar cards. This is what defines Digital India. Next, please. Let me come to some of the good governance practices using Digital India. Next, please. Technology programs in welfare state programs is widely seen. Digital payments through UPI, BHIM, Goods and Service Tax Network, the DIL RMP, the Digital India Land Records modernization. But the big one is digitalization of ration cards, One Nation, One Ration Card, LPG subsidies, labor payments under NREGA through direct benefits transfer. I'll refer to these in the subsequent slides. Next, please. The big game changer has been the direct benefits transfer, and the key DBT enabler has been Aadhaar. Aadhaar-enabled payment systems with network infrastructure has resulted in beneficiary digitization. The deduplication of beneficiaries has been eliminated. It ensures electronic transfer of funds to the last mile citizen. There is also data security, data privacy, and monthly reporting. So who has benefited from the transfers is very clear. Next, please. Next slide, please. The direct benefits transfer program is working in two ways. One is a cash transfer and second is kind transfer. So in the case of cash transfers, we're witnessing subsidy and welfare schemes, social security pensions, and scholarships, as also fellowships. Kind transfers, what we are witnessing is in terms of food subsidies, fertilizer subsidies, training, skill development. And so far, 314 schemes have onboarded onto the DBT Bharat portal. And the Umang app is the one that provides it. Digital IDs have been given. And this today, we are seeing it in banking systems, mobile connections, and virtually every sphere of life. Next, please. So there are three points in DBT that I thought I'll present. DBT in fertilizers, and this was tried many years back, 1991. But DBT in fertilizers was not easy. Even in 2002, the finance minister did announce that he will start a DBT in fertilizers, but it was not easy. It could not be operationalized. And government had to go back to financing the fertilizer companies through fertilizer subsidies directly. But DBT in fertilizer, where the beneficiary is not defined, farmer is identified on the basis of Aadhaar, fertilizers are sold to government at subsidized MRP, and subsidies directly paid to the manufacturer. So this became a game changer where subsidy is paid on the basis of actual sales on POS devices, and a pan-India rollout has been done with a full-fledged mission and grievance redressal and evaluation. The second big change that I want to present is One Nation, One Ration Card. 6 crore beneficiaries, 1.5 crore portability transactions, ration card workers. If you had a ration card in Rajasthan and you went to Madhya Pradesh or to Orissa, and you still could use the same ration card and draw your rations. You could walk into any fair price shop with EPOS, authenticate EPOS using Aadhaar biometric, receive full entitlements. Family members can also access. Implemented across 26 states. So it was a huge game changer. Next, please. Passport Seva Kendra I found was a fascinating study. And Passport Seva Kendra actually introduced end-to-end process overflow with digital overflow. In terms of crowding of people at passport service centers has disappeared. And today, it is being implemented across 488 parliamentary constituencies. You can apply for a passport in a post office across 190 missions, 2 crore online heads. You go to a passport seva kendra, the structure is so streamlined. There's a section A, there's a section B, section C, section D, and you know what time you have to enter, what time you have to come out. And police verification has been simplified. You get your passport within that timeline. And it represents a major game changer in terms of process re-engineering that the Ministry of External Affairs has undertaken. Next, please. Another big area of change represents procurement. And procurement was a complicated process for government to decide on procurement. There used to be procurement officers in every department, and procurement officers had to interact directly with suppliers. And the exercise was often seen as a complex exercise which was very prolonged. And the government e-marketplace changed the way in which government procures on online platforms. So procurement of goods and services being undertaken on an online basis represented a big change in the way government interacted with suppliers, particularly for major supplies. Next, please. Further innovations in government represented by India Post Payment Bank. I did refer to financial inclusion, and the India Post Payment Bank represents one of the big changes in terms of how banking correspondents operate at village level. Today, you see India's countryside is littered with common service centers. You have banking mitras, you have banking correspondents, and you have e-mitras. The number of digital operations in the rural countryside is quite significant. Umang app has nearly 1,200 services. Digital land, as I said, more than 1 crore hits a day in one state alone. You look at the spectrum across the country, there are thousands and thousands of people accessing. And Jeevan Praman was one of the first changes that was introduced. A digital life certificate. You need not visit your pension office to get your pension payments continued. Next, please. I want to refer to secretariat reforms, and the e-office represents a significant secretariat reform. Next, please. I do recall the period in which government offices would witness huge cluttering of files. I led the chairman of the Board of Revenue. I had something like, I saw something like 400,000 files in one building. It was some sight to see, and almost 5,000 files had to be physically brought out and taken back in. And an e-office system actually changed the way in which government handled files today, and the pandemic has further enhanced the use of e-office in government secretariats. The pandemic brought in, redefined India's governance models with less contact governance and work from home for majority of its staff. Next, please. So digital decision making in the central secretariat was through virtual offices. So we found that huge number of virtual private networks had to be operationalized. Departments which were not on e-office had to attend off work during lockdown. Web room meetings became a reality, new protocols were needed, and network security in home Wi-Fi was enhanced. A digital central secretariat with attached offices, subordinate offices, autonomous bodies being delegated e-office software was seen. Next, please. The implementation experience was one of phenomenal success, and we found that more than 80% of the Central Secretariat was working on e-office, 57 ministries, and so we witnessed a quantum jump in the number of e-files vis-a-vis the physical files. It went up, the number of e-files went up from 4 lakhs to 25 lakhs. So today we have a Central Secretariat which is functioning essentially on an e-office platform, And the digital and the Central Secretariat Manual of Office Procedure enabled creation of a digital Central Secretariat. It gave virtual private network access to Deputy Secretary level. And in some ministries, it has been further delegated to undersecretaries and section officers. And functional web rooms were created by NIC teams. Given the gamut and spread of e-office, e-office was awarded the Digital India Award for 2020. And it was a major success story. Next, please. The second evaluation framework that I wish to present is the National E-Services Delivery Assessment. And the e-services delivery assessment assess states and union territories as also central ministries on the efficiency in which government services were being rolled out. Next, please. It looked at accessibility, content availability, ease of use, information security, privacy, and service delivery, integrated service delivery, status and request tracking. So also there were calls made to citizens. There was a citizen-centric survey that was undertaken. About 35,000 calls were made and feedback obtained on how they perceived e-services. Next, please. Next, please. The NESDA covered about 895 services, and what came out was Kerala was one state where integrated digital portals. The state portal was very comprehensive, and it was ahead of the other states in creating digitally empowered citizens. And we also found huge number of success stories in Goa, Haryana, Telangana, Himachal Pradesh, Tripura, Assam. So e-governance in terms of creating integrated portals was very strong. Next, please. When we evaluated the services, we found that Haryana, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, they offered very strong service models. Even states like Nagaland, in fact, I was surprised that Nagaland featured in the top performing states of NASDAQ. Then when I went and spoke to the IT Secretary of Nagaland, he said that they had a collaboration with Estonia and they had received a number of inputs which enabled them to upgrade their e-services. Next, please. In terms of the ministry portals, it's not surprising that CBDT figures right on top. Many of us use the submit our IT returns online now. In terms of human resource development, the Swayam portal does stand out very well. Also, labor and employment with EPFO has a very strong portal. And we have the GST portal of CBIC that stands out. Next, please. An area where we are working on very closely is increasing efficiency in decision making, particularly in the Central Secretariat. And this is an area wherein which government does have a tendency to increase layers and channels of submission. So delayering is an important aspect to look at, and only when the channel of submission is not too long. As I said, in Appleby's case, he found 30 to 42 levels at which it was handled. Today, the government looks at a file not moving through more than 4 levels. A decision has to be made in 4 levels. So ministries are in the process of restructuring their channels of submission to ensure that there is massive delayering, flatter organizations are created. Operationalization of e-office version 7.0 across the Central Secretariat is being pursued in mission mode. Digitalization of central registration units. In fact, the quantum of physical dark that is going out is quite large. In fact, I had realized that we were sending out 33 lakh letters in an annum, almost 3,000 to 4,000 letters a day to every citizen who was filing a grievance. Today, the digitalization of the CRU ensures that an email is sent to the citizen so that he, as an acknowledgement, and also the dark is circulated as a digital dark. And operationalization of a desk officer system wherein which functional delegation is made to a desk officer either at undersecretary level or at section officer level is being made, wherein which he can access files from any time, anywhere. Next, please. So let me conclude with these following slides. Next, please. I said leadership brings in a huge amount of change, and ethical leadership can bring in massive change. And this happened because leadership is all about the courage to dream big. If somebody said we'll have financial inclusion with every citizen having a Jan Dhan account, it was never perceived, but it has happened. And today we are in a position to have and answer so many lakhs of grievances on digital platforms. The courage of conviction is very important. The courage to go against naysayers, courage to lead from the front, courage to make sacrifices. And power is all about making a huge difference to the people. It also is an obsession to win. It's the fuel that drives the engine of success. And internet has presented a great phenomena. It's brought in an anywhere, anytime paradigm into governance. Next, please. This is something that I noticed, and I find that every evening, human assets, in fact, employees walk out exhausted after 8 hours, 10 hours. In many cases, you do 130, 50-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks in some cases. And a successful corporation or a business model ensures that they come back enthusiastic and energetic next morning. Next, please. And that kind of a work environment has to be created. And leadership is all about making people say, I'll walk on water for you. It's about creating a worthy and a lofty dream and helping people achieve it. Next, please. So the agenda for 2022, as I see it, massive scaling up of capacity of state level is needed. And as the Prime Minister announced from the ramparts of Red Fort, that we'll go ahead for saturation of programs. So that's a big ask, and massive scaling up, particularly in state governments, would be needed for saturation of programs. Next, please. Way forward. The way forward. Next, please. The way forward represents e-governance services, simpler, innovative, intuitive e-governance services, a digital inclusive ecosystem, e-literacy for inclusiveness, improving accessibility, security and privacy of data, and of course, strong implementation of the integrated service delivery and standards for uniformity in governance. Next, please. So New India 2022 would look like this: BharatNet, massive DBT, eThal, where digital transactions going up in billions, and eSign, which is constantly used, DigiLocker with document security, the front end being the Service Plus platforms, MyGov, where government is receiving thousands of ideas which are incorporated into leadership platforms. Next, please. And a whole of government approach and a one-stop portal, which is a great step forward. But the portal per se does not guarantee much of an outcome. It requires a system re-engineering, a process re-engineering with an e-governance system being adopted. But there is substantial benefits for governments and citizens from adopting a whole of government approach. Next, please. A New India at 75 to ensure that development becomes a people's movement, successful implementation of flagship programs, bringing together innovation, technology, enterprise, and management, a clean and fair public administration, and the critical institutions of Lokpal, GST Council, and Niti Aayog taking the way forward. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm grateful to Director VIF for inviting me to this.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for that informative, comprehensive presentation. And I'm sure many of us have benefited from this, because there's so many things that we did not know. And it's quite clear that a silent revolution is unfolding. And I think in all aspects of administration, there is this reform mindset which has come in. And I mean, the presentation was really very rich, and I'm sure there will be many people waiting to ask you questions, clarifications, etc. But I just want to underline a couple of points, which is, one is that yes, this is a lot of focus on technology and e-governance, and rightly so. But whether we are taking steps and in not creating a digital divide because of the lack of secure infrastructure, secure, fast infrastructure, and which is affordable, accessible to all. I think we are seeing this in our discussions with various people here, we do sense that a digital divide in the country is one major issue that needs to be tackled. The second is, yes, all this is very important, but whether the mindsets have changed. You talked about accountability. Whether that accountability, the culture of accountability has also come in. I think that's something that also we would like to understand. You also talked about supervision, and particularly how to the efforts to uh, supervising the people and making sure that there is no corruption and people follow ethical values, etc. And you mentioned Lokpal, you mentioned CVC, and so on. But there is a flip side to it, and we often hear that the four Cs are, in some sense, also curbing the bureaucracy from taking important decisions. So this we, at least anecdotally, we keep on hearing. Whether that is an issue of concern. There could be many more, but I'll